Yes.
Yeah, I think we're just about on time. Okay, so thank you all for waiting so patiently, and thank you for coming today to our presentation at Kapolei Public Library on the Oahu Railway and Land Company. Okay, so I'm just going to rip right from the script here. Okay, the Oahu Railway and Land Company, or OR&L, started out in 1888 transporting freight and passengers between Honolulu and Aiea, later expanding in phases to Waianae, around Kaena Point, to Mokuleia, and finally to Kahuku. A second line later ran through central Oahu between Wahiawa and Haleiwa. It also had a wartime role serving the military. So today we're very privileged to have Jeff Livingston, historian and director of the OR&L Hawaiian Railroad Society, who will present on OR&L's 58-year history. And this presentation has been organized by Ewa Villages Historical Society. So I'll turn things over to Jeff.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Can you all hear me? Because if I got to hold one more thing, it's in the way.
Jeff, before you go on, I think I'd say a few words about the Ewa Villages Historical Society. Thank you so much for being here today. We really appreciate it and hope you enjoy it. I grew up right by the rail station in Varna Village, and a number of us from Ewa Villages, including Laurie, Carolyn, myself, and Emmy, we started the Ewa Villages Historical Society because we had an interest in preserving this history of the Ewa plantation and the Ewa villages, and also sharing this with the community. So that's how we got started. So this is our second talk story, and I would love to have Jeff now talk about what he's come here to share today about the Oahu Railway and Land Company. Thank you, Jeff.
Okay. Because I was requested by the Ewa Village Historical Society, I've made this particular section kind of Ewa-oriented. Not about to use a microphone, believe me. You don't want me to. It's much easier if I just talk. Anyway, so this is going to be kind of Ewa-oriented, but what most people forget or don't know or don't realize is that Dillingham's Railroad was not really Dillingham's Railroad. He was the promoter. He got it started. The kingdom had already passed 2 acts well prior to the start of the OR&L to promote railways in the islands. The first railways were not on Oahu. The first railways were built by plantations so they could get their crop to the mill and get it processed. But then that's where the problem came in. How do you get that processed product to Honolulu or to a port where you can ship it? Put it in a small boat, you go through the breakers, you load it on a schooner, the schooner goes to Honolulu, you offload it to the schooner to put on a larger sailing ship to go to the West Coast. Time consuming, labor intensive, costly, and going through the surf, oftentimes you lost sugar. It doesn't like being wet. Dillingham had a vision, and what's really impressive, the railroad was only a small part of it. This guy was essentially a run-of-the-mill standard shopkeeper in Honolulu, but he was one hell of a salesman. His idea was, how do I make the entire side of this island profitable? And the railroad was the way to do it. because there was no mill in Waipahu. There was no mill in Ewa. There was no mill in Wailua. There was no mill in Kahuku. Waianae was the only one. So you had one little mill in comparison with the rest of them. You had Honolulu, and Dillingham had this idea, if I can get from Honolulu all the way around, I can make money. The Oahu Railway and Land Company. The and land actually, I think, is more important because the railroad facilitated the growth economically of the entire island. Initially, well, when the ORNL was complete, it ran from Honolulu all the way around Kaena Point to Kahuku and had a branch that they built in 1904 up to Wahiawa. This was before Schofield Barracks and before Pearl Harbor. So those didn't even factor into it at that point. You have to excuse me because there is so much history. There's so many things, even though I practice this, racing through my head. I'm going to try hard to stay on track here. So initially, he built from Honolulu to the Pearl Lagoon, now known as Pearl Harbor. There's no freight traffic. There's nothing to haul. There's nothing to make money. So what he did, his initial order of equipment were 2 locomotives, 4 first-class passenger cars, 2 second-class passenger cars, 2 combination freight or luggage and passenger cars, and 6 excursion cars or third-class cars. He was in the business of hauling people. Now, he did buy, in all fairness, 3 flat cars, 1 box car, and a track car. But he had to make his initial money hauling people. But where to go and why? Built the line to Pearl Lagoon. The Pearl Peninsula. He bought that. He subdivided it. He sold lots. The land. You buy a lot in the Pearl Peninsula and you get 10-cent fare forever between there and Honolulu, Honolulu, and there. You want to build your house? You'll haul all of your construction materials for free. He made it very attractive. But that number of houses can't afford to keep a railroad going. So he built Redmond Grove, dance pavilion, entertainment. So he'd haul people from Honolulu to Redmond Grove on the weekends. He'd haul people back and forth to the Pearl Peninsula during the week. And that's how he kept going. His next idea was, okay, I got this far, now I got to get to Ewa. Because he was a promoter for the Ewa plantation. Push the rails out to Ewa. Okay, now the railroads at Ewa, still not a lot of material. All the folks from Honolulu, come see the new plantation, come see the construction, come see this modern miracle. And it worked. He was hauling more and more people back and forth. He was essentially an excursion railroad at that point. But along with that came the ability that he could haul more freight. Honolulu to Ewa. The pans, the boilers, the steel, all of that equipment, all of that material, all the lumber, all got hauled on the ORNL. And he's sitting there just, now he's starting to rake in some money. But he wasn't finished. He wanted to keep going. But that got him to Ewa. So what did they see? I'm going to back up a little bit because I keep forgetting I got pictures. Okay, I mentioned that he bought 2 locomotives to start with, the Leahi and Kaala. They were purchased in the Baldwin Locomotive Works, and all of his passenger cars and freight cars were bought from Carter Brothers in California. The passenger cars arrived, the freight cars arrived, no locomotives. Opening day is approaching. He boasted at one point that he would have the railroad run on his next birthday, which gave him just a year. No locomotive. The Hawaiian government bought this locomotive. It was supposed to be used in the Moiliili Quarry. Now, there's a few differences as to why it wasn't used. Some say it was too big, some say it was too small, some say it wouldn't make the turns. In any case, Dillingham bought this locomotive while it was sitting in the crates on the pier, put it together, and this locomotive pulled the very first ORNL passenger train and wound up blowing soot all over everybody in their white suits. You see here it's Kawila, but its number was originally 6. It was named Kawila, and the number 6, it was after his daughter Marion, because she was 6 years old. This locomotive is sitting in our rail yard today. Now, it doesn't have the balloon stack, thank heavens. The ORNL added that at some point, we think, although I've seen one picture that may be Kawila 6 with a balloon type stack. Still trying to research that one. Let's move on to the next one. Okay, downtown Honolulu Station. This is the original ORNL station. These are the 2 locomotives. Now, the 2 models I brought, one is of Leahi. The other is ORNL number 12, which came much later. But they are both built to the same scale. So you can see how tiny Leahi was, and Kaala wasn't much bigger, just only a few tons, as compared to number 12, which came along much later. These were very tiny locomotives. If you look at the passenger car behind it, the passenger car almost dwarfs the locomotive. This one is Kaala, this one is Leahi, and I know that only because I blew it up really big. Both those locomotives served the ORNL until 1923. And I'm sure you all have seen many times the depot downtown. It's not that one anymore. Okay, move on. The passenger cars built by Carter were quite fancy. The first class ones especially. Now the difference between a first class coach and a second class coach, the first class coach had a headliner and it had plush seats and nickel trim. Second class didn't have a headliner, had brass trim, and the seats weren't quite as comfy. They weren't quite wood yet. Those were in the third class. Go ahead. Okay, their servicing was rather rudimentary. You can see the station back here. This was the shop. Now, right here, it's very hard to see. That's actually part of a third class car. What Dillingham did when he bought the third class cars, they had removable tops, so he could use them as freight cars. So as times changed, freight increased, he didn't have to go buy more cars. He could just move from one to the other. It could haul passengers, it could haul freight. And I think the next slide is just the other end of that same building. But it's rather interesting. This is all swamp. And I'll bet you don't know who filled it in.
Is it in the next slide?
Okay, further on down toward the wharfs. Now, he was pretty sly. He had a wharf called the Railroad Wharf. He owned it in Honolulu Harbor. Now, this is before the U.S. federal government got involved. It was just the kingdom, and he made an arrangement. He was on very good terms with the monarchy. And he actually controlled one end of the harbor. He could do pretty much whatever he wanted. And this extended well past the end of the monarchy. The ORNL in Dillingham had tremendous power over that harbor. But try as he might, he could never break into the Big Five. And that's how he filled it in. As B.F. Dillingham contractor building the ORNL, he bought this locomotive used. It later became number 45 Lanakila. And he bought these dump cars, also from Carter. He brought in a steam shovel. And as you can see there, this is right by the present Pualoa Road. And that's how he filled everything in downtown for the station, for the shops. And then later on, his son took over. But we won't go into Hawaiian dredging this trip. Okay, first class coach. The fancy headliner, plush seats, great appointments, top of the line. But they had one car that did it one better. Pearl. This car did not belong to the ORNL. This car belonged to Benjamin Franklin Dillingham, his personal private car. We don't have a lot of information on it. We do know that his intent was that anyone in the royal family could ride this car. So besides its accoutrements as ordered, it came equipped with purple crested, the royal crest curtains. To our knowledge, no one from the royal family ever rode on it. It wound up belonging to his wife. There was some financial difficulties as time went on, so he gave it to her, somehow transferred ownership to her to protect it. And unfortunately, it was modified into an observation car, renumbered number 48, and in 1949, 1950, it was burned at Kahuku. It was part of the Hibiscus and Helconia Railroad. It was an early preservation effort, and they couldn't move it. They couldn't get it out of there. The plantation said it's got to go, and they wound up burning it. So that was the last Carter car, and a car with just a wonderful history, gone forever. I mentioned that Dillingham bought 2 locomotives when he was building. This is the other one, which became number 8, Samson. But this car, this is what the third class car looked like. And to date, this is the best, clearest picture that I have found of that car as built. very rudimentary. And I won't even describe what Dillingham's description of that was, because, well, not only is it politically incorrect, it's just bad. But you can see that it's got a platform here, but they could pull all of this off in this flat car. Then we're back in Honolulu. We've seen enough of those, we can move to the next one. Pearl City. This is Ka'ala, the Pearl City Station. And if you're not sure where the Pearl City Station was, skyline stops right there. About 300 yards, Mauka. The skyline route virtually mimics the original OR&L route all the way through to the Halava. But you can see the freight cars here, very few. They were still dealing primarily with passengers. But with Pearl City, you could get this far and you were right there at your house if you had bought a property. Later on, they even had a cemetery there and funeral cars, 2 of them. We never found a picture of either one of them. So why did you want to come out to Ewa? You wanted to see the plantation, the mill being built. And that's one of the photographs we were fortunate to find. That one belongs to Bishop Dillingham's. I'm going to go back to this vision he had, because it's just unbelievable that he could knit all of this together, connect all of those dots, and no one else had, and be successful. Ran the railroad 72 miles all the way up to Kahuku. And then James Castle tried the same thing on the windward side. Little different idea. He wanted all the small farmers to get involved and bring all of their crops to one central location. And that's where we got the second common carrier. And I know I'm way off from Ewa, but I'm sorry. The Ko'olau Railroad, and it ran from Kahuku to Kahana. They had planned to go further. They actually crossed the waterway at Kahana and never built another mile. Kind of unsure why, but money was always an issue. I think there's another picture. Yep, some more construction. It's just fascinating how they could build something that large without massive cranes, tower cranes, and everything else. But they did it, and did a good job of it. And they finally get it together. Some of these pictures might look the same, but to a railroad type person, that car being 34, we don't have any record of what the car numbers were back then. So every little bit of information gets recorded, and then we try and figure out what it really means. And of course, you can see one of the early cane cars over here. There was a guy traveling in the Orient. He's a British citizen. He was on his honeymoon. He took this picture. This is a glass lantern slide that we were very fortunate to acquire. This is Ka'ala, very early. You notice it has 4 wheels on the tender. It was later changed to 8, soon after really, to increase the capacity. But now if you look all the way to the left there, that third class car is no longer has slats in it. It's been upgraded. Now it's got half sides. If you come out to ride the train in Ewa with us on a Saturday or a Sunday or a Wednesday, our cars are kind of modeled after that. Okay, they're ex-Army flat cars, but they look kind of like that. So there is some historical connection at least. Kerosene. Kerosene headlamp. There's no turbo generator, no electricity. Very, very early. This photograph I estimate is around 1894. So it's one of the earliest ones. Okay, now.
Okay.
And of course, the mill was completed. I'm sure most of you have already seen a picture like that. All right. And as time went on, locomotives got larger. This is the first of the 280 Mikado type locomotives purchased by the ORNL, another Baldwin Locomotive Works project, annexation, and the other one was reciprocity. So you know what year they were purchased in. It's interesting to note, because of the Hawaiian sun, they put a sunshade over the tender, so the fireman, when he was firing the locomotive, had a little bit of shade. It very soon went away. This locomotive, this one was 98. It was running up till the very last day the ORNL operated. It kept right on going. These next few are just, kind of generally whatever it looked like then. Even when I got here in 1990, and I was working at the railroad then, cane fields everywhere. Now somebody planted house seeds. I haven't figured that out, but we have some of these pictures at the railroad on display, and people look at it and they cannot visualize the amount of agriculture and what everything looked like. And unfortunately, we are losing people at all too rapid a rate that experience this. Okay, I'm now the historian of the Hawaiian Railway Society. I got here in 1990. I was here for dive school some years prior, and I saw the ORNL locomotive go by once when it was a terminal railroad. I have no context. I have facts, I have photographs, I have my general understanding of railroads and the ORNL through extensive research, but I never lived it. Bob Pa'oa, our historian emeritus, lived it. He was here, he wrote it, he studied it. The most scary thing in my life was when somebody asked Bob a question about the railroad. He looked at him and said, "I don't know, ask Jeff." Bob is a wonderful guy, my mentor, and one of my very best friends. But he's mid-80s, and statistically, we're going to lose him. And with that, we're going to lose a lot of that context. Anybody want to take a guess where that is? And a hush falls over the crowd. That's Waipahu.
Waipahu. Which part of Waipahu?
That's where the station was, Depot Road.
Oh, Depot Road.
Yeah. That's Waipahu again. It might begin to look a little more familiar as we get more buildings in there.
Try to imagine.
This picture about drove us crazy. The ORNL built a lot of their own equipment. Their passenger cars, their freight cars, The master car builder was a gentleman named John Hughes, an Irishman. He studied engineering under John P. Holland. And for those of you that don't recognize the name, John P. Holland sold the first submarine to the United States Navy. And being a submariner for 27 years, that's the only reason I know that. But these first 3 cars were all built by the ORNL. Now we have a list of various construction projects and what was built and what numbers were assigned. I don't know if you can see it, but you get back on this car, you've got this dark area on the very top. That's the clear story roof. So the roof came up halfway, came straight up, and then it had the rest of the roof. And that straight section there was for ventilation. So there were windows and screens. You could open the windows. They were on little pivots, had a screen behind it. This car doesn't have the clear story roof. We have no record of these cars. Everything we know of had a clear story roof up until 1921, when the second class coaches were built by the ORNL. Another mystery. So when you go home, go digging through your old photographs, and anything that looks like a train, bring to the railroad. Especially if it happens to be a plantation engine number 7. Okay, the ORNL was very advanced for its time. Signaling system, they had a complete signaling system all the way from Honolulu to Waipahu up to Wahiawa. From Waipahu around to Kahuku, they used the telephone. So that was a very unusual, especially for a narrow gauge railroad. And did I mention it's a narrow gauge railroad? 3 feet between the rails, standard gauge on the mainland, 5 feet 8.5 inches. So it is a small train in comparison. And that's Waipahu again. Mooring mast. Anybody ever hear of mooring mast? Oh, one. The Navy built mooring mast for the Akron and the Macron, 2 airships that both unfortunately crashed before they ever got here. But there was a spur that came off the ORNL main line and went to mooring mast. If you stand at the end of our yard and you go about 250 yards toward Waianae and hang a left, you're going to walk right into mooring mast. We actually found the old right-of-way a few years ago. We marked it on GPS. One of our guys was out there cutting rail, and of course when you're cutting rail, it's an abrasive, large, high-speed abrasive disc, and he didn't realize he set the field on fire behind him. So once the fire department got the fire out, we said, oh, look at that, there's all these ties. And that was the spur going to mooring mast. Also, just beyond our yard limit was the spur going to Barber's Point. I've got one slide here later that shows how busy an area that actually was. '64. Now this is an early picture. This is Kaala again, and observation car 64. 64 was built in 1900 in downtown Honolulu by the master car builder Hughes. It was Dillingham's private car. Now, members of the royal family did ride in this car. But it's most unusual. Most observation cars, the observation platform would start right about here. Almost 1/3 of this car length is the platform. John Hughes designed a support structure as though he were designing a bridge. And it worked. It's simply amazing piece of equipment. And it is in our yard today. The second Sunday of every month, 64 goes out and actually is placed in service. It is one of, if not the oldest, regularly in use wooden passenger car in the United States. It is available. I forget what the ticket price it is, but you got to make a reservation because it only holds 16 people. So come ride it. It's cheap. It is fully restored too. It's a beautiful car. Yeah.
It's the first time. Is that pineapple over there? Plants?
I believe it is.
Because like all the other shops was
a-
sugarcane, but I think that's the first time I see pineapple.
A horticulturist, I am not. But no, I believe it is because we don't have a location for that. It could very well be up the Wahiawa branch. But of course, they did a lot of pineapple in the Aiea Pearl City area too. And we get to Eva Mill Station. Now, Waipahu, of course, had the big two-story station. Waipahu originally had a station just like that. When they built the new station in 1911, they built one in Aiea and they built one in Waipahu that were identical, except on the second floor where the station agent lived, the bathroom was in one corner in Eva and in the opposite corner at Aiea, so that the prevailing wind came through the apartment and out the bathroom. These guys were thinking it through. I mean, ask a builder today. They have no idea which way the wind blows. Okay, so the plantation itself is to the left in this picture. And the plantation manager's house is a little, it's to the left and then it's a little further down. It had a passing siding here, so we can, this was a pretty standard design for the ORNL. Go ahead. There it is again, but now we got a freight train coming through here. We're not sure if that is a sand train. I believe it is, but of course they also ran a garbage train during the war. So all the trash from Honolulu got hauled off to Yokohama and got pushed out into the landfill. But this looks like an empty sand train coming back. Or going, I'm sorry, empty going out, because Honolulu is in the background here and it's headed toward Waianae. And that's Depot Road. Why would I put that one next?
Put that one next.
I said, why would I? I'm lost now.
Go down.
Okay, over here. You're trying to mess up my little mind. Okay, this is the other end of the Eva section. The freight house was here, and then that passing track that I pointed out, that's where it came back in, and going this direction, you're heading toward our yard. And same thing going back the other way. Here's the freight shed, a little better view of it. This locomotive is number 80. It's one of the last 4 that the ORNL purchased. and they were 282 Mikados built by the American Locomotive Company. ORNL tried to save one of them, number 60, but it didn't work out. They actually had plans at one point. They wanted to make a railroad museum. So they had collected the Klaus Spreckels from the KRR, which is now back on Maui. They had 2 or 3 Kalakaua cars, which have been dispersed elsewhere. They kept Kauila, which we have. They kept 85, which they then later gave away to California. But their plan was great. The only thing we have left, we got a builder's plate here. You're more than welcome to come up and take a look at it. The American Locomotive Works, March 1925. That's the plate that ran on number 70. And it's one of the few pieces and parts of number 70 still in existence. I don't even want to tell you what Bob Poe had to pay for this. And then donated it. Okay, as you're going through Eva, if you're coming down Renton Road would actually be over here to the right. This was the spur that went to the Eva plantation. This was the main line. Now the next picture is the opposite side of this. The main line, the spur goes off, and right here, that's our yard. So if you come visit the yard, when you cross the main line, you are right in that location at the end of the Eva mill. Now, of course, the fields kept on going, but the mill itself, the plantation trackage and all, ended about there. And unfortunately, somehow or other, the Hawaiian Railway Society owns that road, or at least half of it. And we're thinking about putting toll booth in. We can always use money. Okay, in the 1930s, the ORNL, just like mainland railroads, were really impacted by personal automobiles. Ridership dropped off, expenses climbed, so the ORNL essentially cut most of their passenger traffic. They built M1, which was a gasoline-powered motor car. It had these 2 trucks, each had a 6-cylinder Hercules Red Star engine. M1 and M2 were both built by the ORNL. They took 2 commuter coaches and equipped them with 1 engine apiece, made M3 and M4. But M1 is of interest to Eva because it was the school bus. Now, it ran back and forth on a regular schedule, but it would pick the kids up in Honolulu in the afternoon, take them to Waipahu, take them to Eva. And at Eva, they had an engine house, and the crew had a house. So this car would stay parked in Eva overnight. So first thing in the morning, crack of dawn, it would leave Eva, headed for Honolulu for school. Stop at Waipahu, and it was timed so that it got to the depot, and the Honolulu Rapid Transit left 10 minutes later. And frequently, if it was delayed, HRT would sit and wait. So they were taking care of the kids. But most people don't realize that there was actually an engine shed and a station per se directly on the plantation. at the main depot.
Where is that?
It's on King Street.
Before you cross the bridge.
Yeah, it's right by Olive Park. It's still there.
So why did they ever stop it?
Why did they ever?
Why did they ever stop the line?
The railroad?
Yeah. Or when did that happen?
The main line was abandoned on December 31st, 1947. After the Second World War, the ORNL ran 24/7 all through the war. So the equipment was worn, it was maintained, but it was already old when they started. The newest locomotive was 1925. They did get 2 diesels, but they weren't really designed to run on the main line from Honolulu to Kahuku. So at the end of the war, all of a sudden, you've got very little military traffic, both Army and Navy. You have a much better road infrastructure that the Army built. So the railroad was not as critical as it had been. So for the railroad to make any progress, they needed new equipment, they needed a number of upgrades, and the cost was pretty high. That meant that the plantations and all the shippers would have a significantly higher tariff. And the plantation said, nah, we're not going to pay it. So in 1947, they abandoned the main line because it wasn't feasible to continue. Now they did continue as a terminal railroad under various names up until 1972. So they would run pineapple from the piers to the canneries, and they'd run cattle up to the slaughterhouse. And they made a major push for container freight. The ORNL was one of the first to actually institute container freight. They bought a brand new 70-ton locomotive, or 35-ton locomotive, because they were going to make, this was going to make it for them. Container terminal, they bought flat cars, they got stuff surplus from the Navy, and then had to truck it because there was no line in between. So they had to put it on trucks and haul it. And they were putting 20-foot aluminum containers on these and then breaking it down and distributing it at the harbor. And through a series of events, which would take a number of pages to explain, they lost out on that. And instead of the pier where they had set up and spent all the money, they lost that, they lost the money. And in 1972, they pulled the plug for the final time. Okay, this is what was happening around Eva. Now this guy down here says traced by Henry Bonnell. Henry Bonnell was the last superintendent of the ORNL. So if Henry says this is right, it's right. But coming into Eva, Honouliuli, you've got a Standard Oil spur, you got Pine spur, and these are all of the plantation tracts of Eva. Westlock spur, that switch is now in our yard. That's our main throat switch. We pulled that out. So from right about here on down, that's still in operation today. That's what we operate on. Eva Mill siding, of course, is gone. The Y going in, that's where that water tower was, that's gone. The Kapolei siding is gone. Mooring mast was over here, the Barbers Point yard. We still have track laying on the within the right-of-way that went to Barbers Point, but it's not connected to anything. And then this spur went up to Fort Barrett. They actually moved the guns, the 16-inch guns up there were moved on railroad cars. They used the trucks from the 41st Coast Artillery. I'm getting way off topic, I'm sorry. Yeah. I start talking about the railroad and I just, I'll go on and on and on. And of course, this is the station. This was during World War II. Looks pretty much the same today. We were very fortunate. These letters, Oahu Railway, we have recovered those letters. And at some point in the future, when our museum gets built, they will be probably displayed again. And remember that little 2-track shed that was for their maintenance? This is what they wound up with, the roundhouse. This section over here was a machine shop. There was a large oil storage facility back over in here. Of course, they had sand, gravel, everything else down there. Okay, number 85. And this plate right here, this is a reproduction, but it's number 85's number plate. 85 ran, especially during the war, but prior to the war also, between Honolulu and Barbers Point. So it picked up Ewa, Waipahu. It was the military liberty train, among other things. 85 was donated by the ORNL to a group in California. It wound up at Travel Town. Kyle Railway traded a bunch of equipment and got 85, Ewa number 5, and I think there was something else they got from Travel Town, brought it all back. So all that stuff's sitting on Maui. Kyle sold off to States Railway. States Railway sold off to somebody else. We bought it from somebody else, and I managed to get that thing on a barge and get it home on its 100th birthday. But that locomotive is in our yard.
Just out of curiosity, is that the black one kind of rusty about halfway down the road in the yard?
Well, yeah, it's the black one that's rusty a little bit. Because the black one that isn't rusty, that's number 12. We're working on it. Number 12. That's what this model is of. And not only does it show the size difference, but 12 is sitting in our yard also. There are 3 steam locomotives belonging to the ORNL in existence on the face of the earth, and we got them all. There are 3 diesel locomotives existing on the face of the earth that belong to the ORNL. And I'm trying to get one of them.
Is the EP company, is that one, Steve?
Pardon me?
The EP company. That plantation company, the one you have right out in the yard, getting.
Ever one.
That plantation company.
Yeah.
Says EP. Is that Steve?
Is that?
Was that Steve?
Yes. Yeah. The some of the plantations did have diesels that lasted longer, and Ewa did have a couple at one point, but the only ones we have are steam. There's one locomotive, ORNL locomotive, the little 35-ton that they bought for the container job. It's over on Maui. We thought we had a deal to buy it, and it fell through because the owner wants to sell everything in one lump sum, as is where is. So if you got a couple $100,000, you can buy a railroad. Of course, you got to move it. I saw that. The 2 other 55-ton GE locomotives are both on the mainland, and they're both in service. So although we don't have them here, they are still pulling trains, hauling passengers, and going strong. So you can't complain too much about that. But of interest is, see, this headlight has got a little screen on it. During war, the initial was blackout. Locomotives traveled with no headlights at all, which must have been real fun. Then they decided, okay, we'll let you have a hooded headlight. Well, that wasn't much better. Then they went to an oval blue glass, very small, not too much bigger than the hood there. And then finally, I think it was late 43, early 44, they pulled them off and went back to full headlights. Okay, the earlier pictures of Waipahu, kind of drifting out there when I asked anybody know where it is. Later day, the Waipahu depot back here, the main line is running this way, and this locomotive 22 is going up the Wahiawa branch. It was a major junction at that point. Okay, we got the Waianae, so I'm out of Eva. If you have any questions, I mean, I'm sorry if I get diverted. It is a passion. The history of the railroad and the events surrounding its construction, how it progressed, how it regressed. The military played a huge part in the thing when Pearl Harbor construction started. If you have an interest other than just listening to me babble, there are very few books on the ORNL. We have at the railroad, the next stop Honolulu. We have one that was done with Henry Bonnell and our administrator, Jan Lorimer and Bob Paoa, on Hawaiian Rails of yesteryear. It covers ORNL, that's got some Kailui Railroad stuff in it, it's got some Big Island stuff in it. We have Gail Triber's 4 volumes and 1 hardcover of the war years. That has a lot of plantation stuff in it also. And then there's 2 specific, one on the Navy and one on the Army railroad operations. And for those 2, you can't beat the deal. I wrote them. I'm working on 2 more, but I got to condense it. My ORNL book is over 120,000 words. No one but somebody like me would read that much. So we got to condense. Yeah.
Yeah, so I understand that, the building of the railroads was part of the Industrial Revolution. It made transportation faster. It helped business, right? But like on the mainland, the U.S. government hired people to like kill buffalo in order to make the trains and the railways be able to run without the buffalo crossing the rails. So in Hawaii, I was just wondering, was there an environmental cost to setting up the railroads?
It wasn't even considered.
I mean, I know it wasn't considered, but like looking back now, you know what I mean?
It would be minimal.
Huh?
It would be minimal. Remember, the ORNL was built post-Industrial Revolution and well after the Transcontinental Railroad.
Yeah.
So the ORNL, the environmental cost of the ORNL was probably filling in all of the land areas that they did. And that just continued and continued and continued. Pearl Harbor, the dredging on Pearl Harbor and filling in of wetlands, the fish ponds. Yes, so there was that environmental cost. But at the time, it was not considered. The route primarily ran right along the coastline, and it followed the contours of the coast. They did have to do a fair amount of blasting to get around Kaena Point. But for the most part, it was grading, some fill, some embankments, nothing spectacular. It was almost a level route all the way from Kahuku to Honolulu. Now, the Wahiawa branch going up was a little more complex, but it too followed the grade. They didn't do a bunch of blasting and destruction. They crossed the gullies and they kept on going. So yes, there was an impact, but I think the biggest impact environmentally would have been the filling in of the areas in Waikiki.
Like the Hawaiian fish.
Yeah. Yeah.
Are your photos and images, are they available online anywhere, or is your museum, does it have a website if you want to go?
We have a website, hawaiianrailway.com. Most of these photos are hiding in my computer. Our photograph collection is over 8,000 images, and I have been working for about the last 6, 7, 8 years trying to scan everything. I am in no way, shape, or form smart enough to put them up on a website. If people ask for a specific, they're looking for like I just had someone ask yesterday, they're looking for pictures of Waco 6 because they're doing an interpretive display in Wailua. Okay, I've got pictures of Waco 6. Ask me, I'll send them to you. I still work full time too, so my wife won't let me stop.
I have a question. I lived across the street from the Ahi Hospital in Kaimuki, and in the parking lot across the street from my house, my children would find, the railroad ties, I think you call them, what they run on. Did the rail go there?
Not that I can. Not that I can just quickly say yay, nay. Now, the Honolulu Rapid Transit ran up through there. So it could be that without trying to pinpoint it, then going back and researching back through the maps and everything would be difficult to tell. Jim?
My question is regarding the school transit that we talked about earlier. Did the children have to pay a fare?
Yes.
Did the plantation pay it, or did their families pay it?
The families paid the fare. It was half fare. So any kid going to school was half fare. In the back there?
I was just going to say something about the railroad ties. Let's be honest, railroad ties have been used as garden lumber for a century.
Yeah.
So maybe. No, it could be somebody who's stacking them to put a flower bed in.
You mentioned a stop where the slaughterhouse was?
Yes.
Where would that have been?
I can't give you a good solid answer because it was gone long before I got here.
It's owned by CQU, and it's on the Slaughterhouse Lane, which is off Middle Street. You know where the MTL station is today? Yeah, it's right in there. It's called, and the original name was called Slaughterhouse Lane. You know why it's called Slaughterhouse Lane?
Anything else I can field? Well, thank you so much for coming and for putting up with me. Yeah.
So we asked her a lot of times, but in front of the old airport administrative offices, there was a locomotive located there for many years. The Airport Plantation Administrative Office.
Right.
There was a locomotive in the front of it.
That's EVA 1.
Oh, so you guys have it at
Yes.
your yard?
EVA 1 sits right in the front of our yard. It's getting its tender repaired right now.
Where is your yard located?
1001 Renton Road.
Oh, okay.
If you drive down Roosevelt where the old air station was, you can't miss us. It's the big place with all the trains.
Stay on Renton
Well, no, people have driven right past. I never saw that. That's because I don't want to be driving on the road when you're out there then. Yeah.
You know, the locomotive that's running right now that you have passengers going all the way down. What source of energy does it use? Because I know, I guess it's not diesel, it's not steam.
It's diesel.
Oh, it's diesel?
Yeah.
Oh.
We have 4 operational, well, right now 3 operational because one of them sick. They're all diesel electric, and 3 of them are ex-Navy. One is ex-Army. 7750 is a 25-ton GE, and 302 and 423 are 45-ton Whitcombs, belong to the Navy. 423 operated at Westlock, 302 operated at Lualua, and 174 is a 60-ton Whitcomb that operated at Lualua. And those are the locomotives we use routinely. We would love to have a steam operation, but financially, it is absolutely insane. It costs about $100 a mile to run a steam locomotive. Now that's when you add in everything you have to do to that locomotive. That's just not fuel and crew. The day that locomotive is certified, that boiler gets its ticket, the clock starts. It makes no difference if you operate it once or operate it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. When that ticket expires, you got to shut it down. Take it completely apart, cut the tube sheets out, pull all the tubes, do a thorough UT inspection. It's extremely labor intensive and very expensive. And we just don't have the ridership, nor do we have the engineering capability to do that here.
So would that be the case of steam locomotives in the past when they were the norm in transportation, they would have to operate 24/7 like that? That's like a modern.
Yeah, you can't run them 24/7, but it makes no difference if you run it once or run it continually. And back in the day, they didn't have all these inspections.
Yeah.
I mean, they were inspected. Believe me, you do not want to be around a steam locomotive that has a boiler explosion, and they do happen. That boiler. Well, I know there was a 210-2 on the, well, I can't remember the name of the railroad, but this is a huge boiler. You're talking about a locomotive that's over 200 tons, and it flipped that boiler 150 yards. It's just explosive power. Steam is nothing to, so just a steam engine. Yeah, right. Extremely powerful.
Question. I was interested to read that there was actually a train.
A which?
Hula.
There was the Kodak hula thing. They didn't do hula on the train. But yes, Kodak ran specials. The ORNL ran specials. I mean, toward the end, they went back to the beginning. They started hauling passengers out to Haleiwa Hotel. Very, very popular trips too. You go out and spend the weekend, buy your ticket, buy your room at Haleiwa Hotel, go out, spend the weekend, come back, all ready to go Monday morning. Okay, there was another one.
I guess I'm just trying to imagine the life of a kid who rode the train. So, what time do they start most likely from Eva, and how long will it take to reach Waipahu, or if I'm going to school?
From Eva to Honolulu, the way the school train ran, because it stopped in Waipahu, and then it would stop briefly to pick up anybody else, was about 35 minutes. Yeah.
So they take it back and forth, right?
Yeah. Yeah, they go down in the morning, come back in the evening.
Well, they're really
You had a question?
You haven't put anything new out there that might be the same thing.
Anything else? Yeah.
You mentioned an IA train station. Where was that?
You know where Fleet Landing is? Or was? Right across.
Near the 49er campus?
Yeah, right across there.
The public park?
Pretty close.
Oh, okay.
How did they choose the names for the trees?
I haven't got a clue.
Since I asked about that near Diamond Head, because Leahi
Yeah.
is Diamond Head. So, I don't know.
Well, you had Leahi on one end and Ka'ala on the other.
Yeah, right.
But then the ORNL didn't keep the names all that longer. Like the first number, 6, I mentioned, was his daughter's Marion's age. And then 15 was, I think, Walter's age, one of his sons. And 19, which was Ka'ala, I can't think of the second son's name right now. But they were all the ages of his kids. And then Lanakila became 45. That was his age when the ORNL took it over. So that's why the ORNL locomotive numbers are all over the map. I mean, you got 76, 98, reciprocity and annexation, but yet it's one locomotive serial number is one number off from that one. And then you've got 22 and 31. It's the exact same style of locomotive. One serial number different. Why one was 22 and one is 31? No way of knowing. Yeah.
Do you ever have a lot of folks coming to the yard, telling their story of their part in the railway construction? I only met one person, Pedro Amara. I mean, I'm just trying to see whether there are folks from the era who comes to the yard to tell their stories about how they...
Not so much anymore.
Not even one who would stand.
Every now and then, somebody will come by and talk story, and we pay close attention and take notes.
I have a question.
Okay. You were.
Oh, me? Yeah,
Yeah.
I was just wondering, with the steam engines, seeing as how expensive it is to keep those things running, has anybody given any thought to slapping an electric motor into them with a battery? Just so
No.
it trips up and down and people will ride?
No.
No.
But I have considered a hydraulic motor.
Well, I was thinking the diesel electric might, engine might work.
Well, it's.
Get it in there.
I have a question. I think you're missing a golden opportunity. Don't you need volunteers?
We are always needing volunteers.
So folks, where's the list? Where's the sign up?
Just come by
I
the.
had a friend, our neighbor, 25 years ago. It was kind of an involuntary voluntary. His social work, or what they call it when the judge said you got to do community service. He worked there.
No, we are always looking for volunteers.
Yeah.
One of the problems in working in that kind of an environment, you need some degree of some skill level. And when I went out there in 1990 for the first time to volunteer, oh, well, here's a weed eater. Okay. I'll do that. I did that for a while. I pulled weeds and did this and did that, yard work essentially. And I said, well, this isn't really what I'm interested in doing. Yeah, it has to be done. I understand that. I'll help. But I want hands-on in the train. Now, I was a chief electrician's mate when I got commissioned. I retired as a chief engineer, of a U.S. Navy warship, I think I've got some ability. You want me to cut grass all the time? So after that experience, as I progressed through the organization, and I'm not sure how I wound up being a historian other than I was curious, but volunteers come out, I always want to give them something meaningful to do, because sometimes it's going to be cut grass. But a lot of the work we do is what I call bull work. I've been involved for about the last 18 months in the restoration of the French 40-8 boxcar. That's my personal project. There's a lot of scraping, a lot of painting, a lot of wire brushing. It's nothing glamorous. You get dirty. In fact, I was trying to stay clean this morning, and I almost pulled it off. So, yes, we need volunteers, but we also need to be able to offer those volunteers something meaningful to do, at least occasionally. And not scrape paint, cut grass, but a lot of what we do is scrape paint, cut grass, and touch up and do maintenance, and it's miserable work out in the sun. So come on out and join us.
Ben Dillingham got started that way.
Pardon me?
Ben Dillingham?
Yeah.
He was an attraction recruit. But he wasn't a volunteer. His father forced him to do it.
Did the present rail system that we have right now, did they, people come to you for research on,
Not at all.
not at all? Because
Nope.
it seemed like some of the, like you said, the Waipahu.
Oh yeah, it follows right along.
Follow the so-called track system that was established, by the organization of yours. So I just want to know, if they had any kind of questions or.
No, had they? Yeah, I'm not going to go there. I support the rail. It's going to make. Right now, it's politically it's a hot potato. It doesn't serve the purpose for which it was intended at the moment, but it will. I understand why they had to open when they did, but if they could have got at least to Pearl Harbor before they opened, then it would have made a difference. Or to the airport, it would have made a difference. Right now, it's just opening for more negative feedback from people.
Parking lots would help.
Parking lots would help, yes. Anything else? Well, thank you very much. And I think I will unhook myself now.